Well, hello, Isaiah class. I hope you're doing well. Welcome to week 2. And I wanted to go over the assignment, which deals with the question of multiple authorship. As you know by now, there are many scholars and commentators who just assume that Isaiah was not written by one prophet, but two or possibly three, or a school of Isaiah disciples. And the idea would be that in the second half of the book, chapter 40 through 66, Isaiah is addressing the exiles who are in Babylon. The first 39 chapters deals more with events uh, during the earlier part of Israel's history when Assyria was the superpower. So these two very vastly different historical settings, separated by about 100 years, raises the question, was there one Isaiah? Now, for your assignment, here's what I'm going to have you do. This is the alternative assignment. On page 33 through 41, Oswalt dissects the multiple author view of Isaiah. Your job is to create a numbered list of his 11 arguments for single authorship and against multiple authorship. Now you say, well, do we have to believe in single authorship? No, not necessarily. The reason I'm having you summarize Oswalt is simply this: in studying a scholarly issue, what you want to do is at least find and gather the arguments for or against together. And here is one of the few places where you've got 11 arguments gathered together. So I'm having you put them in your own words and analyze them, but not necessarily agree with them. Let me go on reading. You should then use your own words to explain the argument. Be brief. You don't want to rewrite his article, but you do want to write enough that you could pull this assignment out in 3 years and have it make sense to you. So you're going to be teaching Isaiah at some point in your teaching career, and you're going to say, boy, I remember that whole multiple author issue, but I can't remember what the arguments are. Do I have to reread Oswalt? No, boom, I saved this on my computer. I open it up. There in 1 or 2 pages are all the arguments summarized. All right. So I have even given you some categories to help you stay on track. Here's a guide for the 11 arguments. 4 arguments against the multiple authorship theory. Then 4 arguments explaining the data from a single authorship view. So here he's saying, here's why I don't believe in the multiple authorship theory. Then there's 4 arguments looking at the data and explaining it from a single authorship view. And then 3 more arguments supporting the single authorship view. Try to summarize them briefly enough that you remember what they are, but you're not rewriting the entire article. Then conclude at the end of the paper, write a couple of paragraphs either agreeing with or disagreeing with his overall arguments. Explain what was most or least convincing to you. So there you go. There's the assignment. Now, let me touch on one of the issues that's going to come up, and that is the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Isaiah scroll of the Dead Sea Scrolls. If you look at a map of Israel, here is Jerusalem, south is Bethlehem. If you go east, you're going to run into the Dead Sea. And on the Dead Sea, there is an area called Qumran, where a group of separatists lived before and after the time of Christ. And they were scholars, and they had a library of Old Testament books and many other writings. Now, in 1946, there was a shepherd boy, a Bedouin shepherd boy, who lost some sheep, and he threw some rocks into some caves at Qumran, and he heard something break. He went into the cave, and it was a clay jar, and in it were some scrolls. And then he discovered in that cave and other caves numerous writings and scrolls. Now, why does that matter? Well, prior to 1946, the earliest manuscript of the Old Testament dated to around 1000 AD. So, of course, when you study ancient manuscripts, the closer the manuscript to when it was written, the better. But here we have, up until 46, the oldest, or you could say the earliest manuscript was 1000 AD, and the Old Testament was written in BC. But then in 1946, the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. So let's add 1946 here. A complete scroll of Isaiah was discovered. It's called the Great Scroll, dating between 356 and 103 BC. So there is some scholarly disagreement as to exactly how old it is, but it could be as old as 356. And remember, the Old Testament was completed around 400 BC. So here we go from, in one find, we go from our earliest manuscript being 1000 AD to now another 1,000 plus years into the Old Testament. All right. Now, let me show you something interesting when it comes to that particular scroll. And here you can actually go online and look at the Isaiah scroll. So they've taken a photograph of it, and it's multiple pages, and you don't even need to know Hebrew, but you can run your cursor over the text. And here we're in chapter 38, and here we're in chapter, let's see if we can get that cursor back, chapter 39. And if you actually click on, for example, chapter 39, verse 8, the very last verse in 39:8 says, then Hezekiah said to Isaiah, the word of the Lord which you have spoken is good, since he thought there will be peace and stability in my lifetime. That's the end of 39. Now, the multiple authorship view says that chapter 40 would be a different Isaiah, a different prophet writing. But here's what you notice. Right after verse 8 of 39, we move the cursor, and we see that chapter 40, verse 1, which begins, comfort, comfort my people, says your God. That verse is in the same column as 39:8. And then the rest of 40 goes over here. Now, that is not a decisive argument, but it is an argument that says, let's say this scroll really does date to 350 BC. By the time the copyist copied this, Isaiah 39 and 40 were not seen as separate books, as indicated by a separate column, but it was one unit, as indicated by verse 40, verse 1, starting right here. Now, again, that is one of the arguments. You can think that through as to how effective that argument is, but that's what they're talking about when they make reference to the Dead Sea Scrolls. Hope that's helpful.